Hello, I'm Emilie Bellet, founder of Vestpod and author of You're Not Broke, You're Pre-Rich, and you're listening to The Wallet. Every week we bring you the best tips, guidance, and a good dose of inspiration and motivation to manage your money better. This week we explore how financial identity gets formed from childhood experiences and emotional patterns, investing behaviors, and the stories people carry about money. My guest on this episode of The Wallet is Ylva Baeckström, behavioral finance expert, psychotherapist, and senior lecturer in finance at King's College London. We unpack why financial decisions are rarely just rational, how fear, shame, status, and belonging shape behavior, and why so many people feel emotionally overwhelmed by money, even when they know what they should be doing.
Remember that we are not certified financial advisors. Information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.
I'd love to know a little bit of your background and what led you to look at finances and money and the behaviors around money, with also like maybe a gendered angle.
The gender angle is my favorite. The real story is that I did my degree in 3 countries, Sweden, Denmark, and the UK. And after graduating, I was walking around the streets of London thinking about what to do. And that was in the day when there were recruitment agents and you walked around with your CV. So I did. And a man said to me, you need to go to the city, girl. And I thought, okay, well, fine, I'll go to the city then. And I got a job in banking and I had a great time working in banking for many years, but got eventually intellectually understimulated at some point. And I also at the same time realized that we treat female clients differently to male clients. We seem to be more careful with women. They were not as many women working in finance, particularly at senior levels. And I was curious about this. Now, if you're still with me, at the same time, I started a psychotherapy degree. So I did that in my spare time, and I became a psychotherapist, specializing in relationship. So I used then that psychology expertise and put that into finance, if you like, to investigate gender differences in financial advice. So I looked at how financial advisors interact with female and male clients and how then from the client side, the clients feel about their interactions with the advisor, depending on their own gender and the gender of the advisor. Long story.
But that's so interesting. I mean, especially when we know that there's a big advice gap in the UK and most people are not getting any advice on their personal finances. There's also the gender. So I talk to women and often they want to meet female financial advisors, but there's not so many of them. So again, I think that adds probably another layer of complexity. I'd love to talk about behaviors today, and we'll talk about gender and investing. But maybe at what point did you realize that money decisions are rarely just about money?
At some point in my career in banking, actually, I think in my very first job, I realized that we want to work with people we like to work with. We feel good with certain people. We feel less good with other people. We prefer certain clients. We prefer certain colleagues. And really, it's very little to do with money and mostly to do with relationships, which is why I thought that the relationship psychology works quite well when you bring it into finance. So that didn't take me very long to understand, really.
And so I've been looking at all the piece of research you wrote about, and you write about attachment styles. Can we start with that? Can you tell me what these are?
So when we grow up in our families, we learn to relate from our parents normally as the first relationships that we have, and then of course with our siblings. And we develop, depending on how we interact in the family, we develop different ways of attaching to people. So you can become avoidant, be scared of relationships, for example, be scared of relationships with other people. You can be secure in your relationships with other people. You can be anxious. These are just 3 different styles. And in the family, we also handle money. And we talk about money or not. A lot of families do not talk about money, actually, particularly with girls. Probably more so before than now. I think now is a bit better. But the way that the family interacted around money will affect how you then handle money in the future.
So can you give me some example of, let's say, at home, we were not talking about money, for example. So maybe I was observing behaviors, maybe from parents, or hearing maybe messages. Can you tell me what avoidance means in adulthood, or some of these, attitudes?
So first, I need to say that psychology is really complex.
Yes.
So if you didn't in your family talk about money, do you have a brother or sister?
Yes.
Brother.
Yeah.
So your brother might have reacted to that in a different way to what you did. So the way that things are happening in a family affects siblings differently, even if you think you handle people the same way. Later in life, you might then want to rebel against how things were in your family, and you might then think you want to conquer finance. That might have been your case.
And launch the Wallet podcast.
You went into banking, right? It could be that you feel that you don't know about money and you become scared of it, so you avoid it altogether. It could be that you do it, but you do it kind of a little bit and you're really worried about it. So it can affect you in very different ways. And I think in your case, you became very interested in money and finance.
Yeah. So is it a good starting point for people who are listening to this episode, trying to think about maybe the early days or early relationship with money?
I think it's a very good starting point to think about how money was managed in the family and how that's affected you. And here I'm not saying that you can't get rid of that or that you can get rid of it. So it's very difficult to just say, oh, that was my childhood. That's not going to affect me today and I'm going to be different. That's hard. But what's important to think about is try to accept that something from the past has affected who you are today and try not to let it hold you back.
So what are the first steps for someone who's avoiding any money conversations or anything to do with finances? And sometimes it's even maybe checking your bank account or doing a budget. What can they do to, slowly get into the flow of looking at money?
As a psychotherapist, I will ask my clients to practice.
Yeah.
So I will ask them to practice by trying to talk to people, friends who they trust, to just start bringing money into the conversation with people, start learning about money, asking questions about investing in finance, and see how you feel about that. Because once you start to break down that barrier and take the initial steps, it lowers. The barrier becomes lower and you become used to it, and all of a sudden it's not so scary anymore. The first time is the scariest.
So talking about it, maybe building your own relationship with money, so using your own vocabulary also around money is important. Is reading books, maybe listening to podcasts?
Depends. I mean, you can listen to this podcast and hopefully will inspire some people to learn about money. But the main, so I want to say here that the main thing that is holding people back, the main things, is lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
Anxiety is huge. And then this being scared of losing the money you've saved, because it's difficult to save money. People don't have a lot of money, and once you've saved it, you don't want to lose it. But of course, if you keep it in cash, then inflation will erode the value of the money eventually, and that's no good. So that holds people back, and also thinking that they can't afford to invest.
Yes.
So in order to combat those things, we've got to learn about money. Everybody I speak to, my research shows that people do not learn about money at home. They did not learn about money and investing at school. And over 70% of children leave school with insufficient knowledge about managing their personal finances. So obviously there's a big job for society and the education system to do in this country, or in many countries. But to learn is key.
Yeah. And what do you think kids can learn about money? Because you talk about investing, and that's really important to grow your savings, over inflation, but at the same time have some emergency savings. So where do we start with kids? What are the right, age and right conversations to have?
It's a difficult and an easy question at the same time. It's never too early to start. I think you start as young as you possibly can to bring it into the conversation and to normalize to talk about it. Because the more normal it becomes for them to talk about money and investing, the more they'll do it. And then they'll bring that to their friends and you'll have a ripple effect, and all of a sudden lots more people will talk about it. Where to learn is a tricky one, because children, young people, and older people turn more and more to social media. And that could be a good source of information, but you've got to make sure that you can trust your source. Because there is a tendency for, I think this is particularly with younger men, to follow influencers and actually lose quite a lot of money by taking concentration positions, trading too much, buying things you don't have enough information about. And that can then eat away at your confidence. And you might end up with different problems than you had from the beginning. So I think learning from real trustworthy information, and as a parent, I think that's part of your responsibility to find out where that's available.
Yeah, and you mentioned that girls were maybe not part of the conversation as much as men. Maybe this is changing. I've read some statistics somewhere that sometimes girls get less pocket money than boys. So we tend to see these biases and behaviors from a very young age. Do you think that then impacts women more in adulthood when they're becoming independent and they have to manage their own finances?
So I've done some research with colleagues just now, and here we look at the gifts that people give children for their christening or baptism. And here we see a tendency for the gifters to give more likely to give monetary gifts to boy babies than girl babies today. This is very new research. But we also very, very good. We find that raising the financial capability and financial awareness of the giver changes this pattern. So knowledge doesn't just affect the person who's investing. It also affects the person who observes the other person. So it's positive all around. The negative thing I'd like to share with you as well is that when I look at 16-year-olds, and this is a study I've done in Sweden, where I measure the financial knowledge, the confidence, the tendency to talk about money, risk tolerance, then girls score lower than boys on all of the measures. And they're also less likely to talk to their friends about money and finance, investing, less likely to get information from social media, which could be good and bad depending on how you look at it. But so school also kind of fails to narrow the gender gap already, and is created at a very young age.
Wow. So that's already impacting how girls think. I think when we bring this education to girls, I mean, I see sometimes in girls' schools, they know how to do this maybe in a different way, because it's girls, talking together, and you don't have boys then joining and being maybe sometimes louder or talking about different attitudes towards money. Have you observed that?
Women who've gone to girls' schools and have gone to university still can come out with a business degree, never having learned anything about personal finances.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. When I talk to some women, they tell me, I'm bad with money, but I don't think anyone is bad with money. I think it comes from behavior. Do you hear this often, like this issue around confidence? We talked about education, but I think confidence is slightly different.
Yes, confidence is misplaced, but different. It's not strange that, well, firstly, women weren't born to be less confident than men when it comes to money, finance, and investing. So part of the problem is that women have been excluded from finance and investing until quite recent in history. It wasn't until 1975 that women can open bank accounts in the UK without a male signature. And in 1973 was the first time that a woman was allowed to become a member of the London Stock Exchange. And that tells you that women didn't belong in finance, and that exclusion affects how women feel. The women who were entrepreneurs then, I mean, some very high-profile entrepreneurs, they used to fake their names on credit applications just to be able to fund their ventures. And wives weren't, independent from their husbands until 1990 in the tax returns. And so all of those things obviously have told women, you do not belong in finance. And once you treat somebody like a stereotype long enough, they might end up becoming the stereotype. There are some strong women, women who will be rebelling, like maybe you did a little bit, and maybe I did. And we think, well, if you're telling me I can't do that, I'm going to do it better than you.
Yeah.
But not everybody is like that. So, of course, how you treat women when it comes to investing makes a huge difference because they belong there and they are really good at investing. Not only do women's portfolios outperform men's portfolios, women also invest more sustainably. So they hold companies with higher ESG ratings, they think more longer term, they don't tend to buy and sell as much as men do, and therefore their portfolios often outperform.
This episode is sponsored by Wealthify. Want to start investing but not sure where to begin, or perhaps you don't have the time to manage it yourself? Well, Wealthify makes it simple by choosing and managing your investments for you. Open your account at wealthify.com. With investing, your capital is at risk. Wealthify is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. So how do you... I think women know that they need to invest, but they don't for a number of reasons, maybe, not having enough disposable income. There's all the structural barriers also on why women don't have enough money. Maybe it's the confidence. But what's helping women think more about investing when they look at their finances?
So I feel like I'm repeating myself here because it's all about knowledge.
Yeah.
We can get stuck in thinking that women are lacking confidence, women are not motivated to invest, women earn a lot less than men. Yes, we do. But all of those things are factors that can be sort of overcome with knowledge. So everybody I speak to say that I never learned. I really want to, but I never learned. And when you never learn something, it's really hard because you don't know where to start. But you just have to start.
So when women look at investing, men and women look at investing, they may have a different approach to risk. We often hear that women are risk adverse. I don't think that's the case. But how do we approach risk and define risk?
So firstly, there is a difference in risk tolerance when it comes to investing between men and women. In general, women have a lower risk tolerance than men. However, there are differences within the female population. Women who are successful, as in I don't mean personally now, but in work, for example, who are senior managers, who are entrepreneurs, can often have a higher risk tolerance level than men, or have higher than the rest of the population of women. So that's important to know. But the real risk for women is not to invest, and I think that's what we need to learn. It's problematic that risk has been framed in a scary way.
Yeah.
It's almost like we are trying to scare people off with the way that we frame financial investing and the risk classifications. But those have just been changed, haven't they? And the language is becoming a bit more approachable, perhaps, could be the right word. So that we remove that stigma to it. So when it comes to risk, though, when in investing, women tend to avoid investing more than men do. But when they do invest, take more appropriate risk, which means that longer term, the portfolio is most likely going to perform better than a man's portfolio. And that is something that we need to hold on to. We need to role model women investors and their success to show that actually this is for women just as much as it is for men.
Yeah. Is there also a challenge around women still being the primary carers? Maybe there's this idea that, we are extremely busy and it's, I need also to do my investing and money management, and maybe I don't have the time, or maybe it's not my top priority. What can we tell women who think this way and know they need to invest, they need to find the time, but it's quite tricky?
In a busy life, it is hard to find time to focus on yourself. And perhaps there is more of a tendency for women to prioritize other people, including the family members, ahead of themselves. Maybe there's a gender difference there. But it's quite simple. Firstly, make sure that you have a pension. If you fall outside of the auto-enrollment threshold, you earn less than £10,000 a year, or you're self-employed, make sure that you have a SIP or that you contribute to a invested pension scheme so that you do make some investment. Very simply, you can just buy something that tracks something. I'm not giving advice here, of course, but it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to select different stocks or even asset classes and things. You can just do something very simple. And then you can save £20,000 a year in an ISA where all the returns are tax-free. And from 2027, £8,000 of that £20,000 needs to be invested, can't be held in cash, because that's another issue where women tend to stay in cash ISAs more, whereas men invest their ISAs. So actually, those two things are quite simple to do. And make sure you check that you've got your national insurance contributions. And you can backdate payments to those if needed.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about perception of what an investor is. So if you're listening to this podcast at home, can you try to picture maybe an investor? And we'll give you a few seconds. But according to you, I mean, do you think the culture around investing needs to change? Maybe it's the messages we've been receiving. We talked about childhood, but there's also everything in between, maybe from teenage years to today, maybe movies, books, everything around investing, I think, doesn't sometimes depict the reality of investing.
No, it doesn't really. When I prepared a talk maybe a year ago or something, I Googled a picture of a successful investor, and I've got pictures of white, very good-looking men. And then I also Googled pictures of successful business leaders, and they looked very similar to the successful investors. So I think that's definitely still there. And last year, I helped a financial services firm with some research on looking at these financial movies, Wolf of Wall Street, Big Short, and those movies, industry, and analyzing the way that male and female characters are portrayed is called alpha portrayals of an alpha industry. And I think you can work out that women are in sideline roles, slightly sexualized often. The men are successful and powerful. And so this is what we're fed from media. This is what we're fed from everywhere. And of course, that's the first picture that then comes into your head, regardless of who you are. We don't necessarily see Jane Fraser, CEO of Citibank, because she's the only one.
Yes.
So it's hard to picture her.
Do you think people resist investing sometimes because of greed, of maybe, they don't want to buy into, capitalisms, into system that they don't believe in? And do you think that's another barrier?
It could be, but I think that is very small compared to the societal problem of people not investing.
Yeah.
So, of course, it could be cultural beliefs or other beliefs that you carry with you that means you do not want to invest for anti-capitalist reasons or something like that. But I think that's a minority of the population. But it's an important point where we need to have a way of investing ethically and sustainably. But in fact, if we are going to be able to transition to a more sustainable future, we need to shift capital towards that. So maybe if those are values that you carry, you can be an important part of that financial transition.
Yeah, but I think it's often a barrier that's mentioned by women, joining our courses. They're like, I don't want to participate in this system, so how do I do it? And sometimes it's looking at, ethical choices or ESG, but that can also complicate your, your investments, especially when it's like the beginning of your investment journey. So I think it's, as you say, knowledge, getting started, and slowly becoming maybe a bit more specialized into what you want to invest in.
Yeah, but here women have to have, I'm going to use the word confidence in their abilities. It's called self-efficacy, where you believe in your own abilities. So financial self-efficacy, we've said it already today, and I'm going to say it again. Women's portfolios outperform those of men's often. Women also invest more sustainably. So technically, that means we need more women to invest in order to transition more funds towards a more sustainable future.
And can you talk about why women are better investors or great long-term investors?
Well, maybe one of the things is what you said earlier. We have less time to focus on the portfolio and reweighting
And
it all
buy
the
and
time.
sell.
Yeah. That was sort of a joke. No,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think that we make more informed decisions. So we, if you have a bit of a lack of confidence about something, the way to overcome that is to learn more about it. So I don't know about you, but when I look to invest in something, I read up on it, and I tend to make a more maybe diversified choice, and then I buy it because I want to own it. Isn't that what one of the great thinkers? I can't remember who it was who said it. Buffett or Soros or something like that said, that if you don't want to own something, don't buy it.
Yeah.
This liquidity is one thing that you won't be able to sell something quickly, but if you do believe in a company, then you might want to own it. And if that is also a sustainable company, fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, and talking about, diversification also, and sometimes you don't even need to pick this. I know you're talking mostly about funds and not necessarily individual investments, because they tend to be really risky. You need more time to research these investments. But, looking at a longer period of time in a more diversified way, then you can also automate your investments, and looking at funds that, will be there with the top companies in the market for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I'd love to hear you talk about the research you've done with financial advisors, and maybe how men and women were approaching their personal finances and the advice they'd love to receive on their investments.
So here I designed a study that where I created pen portraits, like descriptions of people, and I would describe, for example, a 45-year-old woman who
Personas of,
like who had they were quite wealthy descriptions of people. And then what I would do is I would change the gender. So I would call her Mary, let's say, and then I called her Paul. And then I showed 10 of these scenarios to lots of advisors. And I asked them to consider how much in control they thought the investment client was over their finances and investments, how much financial knowledge they thought they had, and what portfolio they would recommend to them. And I had designed portfolios that had different riskiness ranging from 1 to 7. 1 was the least risky and 7 was the most risky. So higher equity weight towards portfolio 7 and lower in portfolio 1. And in a study that I did in 2014-15, I found that advisors tended to think that the women described, when Paul was Mary, they thought that Mary knew less than Paul did, even though it was exactly the same person, and thought that maybe they were less in control over their finances. I would recommend a lower risk portfolio to Mary than to Paul. However, having redone that study again, in 2020, I see some shifts.
That's amazing.
So I see that there's some shifts because it was particularly strong with women advisors who would underestimate the investment needs of the female clients relative to their male clients. But these attitudes are shifting a bit. So I think that's important to hold on to, that financial advisors are maybe not as biased as they were. They are also changing. Then I turned to the other side, to the client side, and I looked at how does a man and a woman feel about themselves as investors, and how do they invest depending on their own gender and the gender of the client. Here, I found that women invest much more when they have a female advisor rather than the male advisor. And you said earlier, Emilie, that there are fewer women as advisors, and yes, there are. It's about 20%, 18% are women, I think. But what that research tells a financial services firm is that they need to hire more female advisors, because their female clients invest up to 11% more if they have a woman as their advisor.
That's amazing. Do you think is it because of trust or confidence, relationship, I guess?
I think it's got to do with trust. These women also, by the way, they also feel more confident and they feel more knowledgeable, and they have a higher risk tolerance level, even compared to men in the sample. So this gender difference in risk-taking and confidence and is not always there. It's just in part of the... If you treat women right, it's not necessarily there anymore. So you can unlock traits in a person by treating them in the right way and showing them that investing is for them. Another reason I think that women invest more when they have a woman as their advisor is that the woman advisor is role modeling that investing is for women because she's done it.
And now with the use of tech, AI, you talked also about social media and the younger generation also getting there. I mean, there's not enough advisors. Maybe you need to have, a sufficient amount of money to be able to work with an advisor. It's expensive, so people turn to social media, and today they turn to AI. Mm-hmm. Have you been doing some research around that, or is it something you're thinking about? What's your approach on these two different sources of information?
So as it happens, I've done some research on AI.
And you've done research on everything. I love it.
So here I've compared the advice that human financial advisors give to men and women with the advice that AI give, and we've tested lots of different families and types of engines, and I'm finding that on average AI is less biased. Mm-hmm. But AI treats the Paul and Mary, if you like, in that example,
as one.
They treat them the same.
Okay.
They don't make a difference between the gender of the person who invests, and that is even if I feed in to the AI engine, if I feed in the characteristics of the advisor, I instruct the model to imagine yourself as a 45-year-old male with you've been an advisor for X number of years, you hold this in your own personal portfolio. What would you advise this client?
Okay.
Still, the AI is less biased. But AI also gives lower risk recommendations overall.
Yeah. And money not compounding as much. That's fascinating. And do you think in the next, 5, 10, 15 years, how do we see AI and tech? If you talk to financial advisors, are they planning to leverage and integrate AI probably? What do you think is going to be the impact on behaviors? Are we going to see everyone investing because the knowledge is there? Or do you think that will add also more complexity and challenges?
We need more research, and I'm doing more research in this area. I'm really interested in this area and how I can develop, because part of financial advice problem is that it's expensive and it's inaccessible. And the people who do use financial advisors are normally wealthy, older, and more men than women. Mm-hmm. So people feel they can't afford advice or they can't access it. Robo-advisors didn't really take off in the way that that perhaps the industry had hoped. Part of the problem with that is that robo-advice is offered by financial service institutions, and if somebody is not accessing financial services, they're not going to see the robo-advisor. So you need to have an account in order to, etc. With AI, of course, it's used by large proportions of populations, increasingly so. However, problematically, there's a 20 percentage points gap between men and women using AI. And I'm not going to judge whether that's good or bad at this point, but if we roll out services like this into AI tools like financial advice, then we've got to be mindful of the fact that it will reach more men than women.
Any other research you're looking at, excited about, or anything that will help women think more about investing?
So right now I'm working on research where I want to test different educational methods in school, because as my daughter told me about a year ago, she said, "Mama, we have the same way of teaching in school as we did when we had horse and carriage in the street. We didn't have cars." And she's right.
Yes.
So we teach the same, we preach in front of people. So we need to test different ways of education. So I'm developing different educational, I can't say too much about it yet because it's not done. Maybe next time we could talk about that. And I want to test that in schools and see whether we can increase financial knowledge, but also whether we can reduce the gender differences in the gap there.
Exciting. You've seen these new schools in the US leveraging AI where kids learn for 2 hours a day on AI and they score much better at tests and stuff like that.
Well, we need to be realistic. We moved on. We all have shorter attention spans. We learn in different ways. When you multitask, if you're watching something at the same time as you're reading, and like children do these days,
I do.
Yes, we all
we all
do. However, it does eat away at your confidence, because when you're doing lots of things at the same time, you can sometimes feel that you're not good at anything. And you're failing at everything. So we got to be mindful that we don't trick ourselves into a position where we think that we don't actually know. It's good to be able to concentrate on something for a while.
And that's really true for social media, actually. I mean, we on the wallet, we leverage social media and we publish clips and stuff like that. And hopefully that's helpful. But sometimes it's overwhelming. And I don't know what's your view on that, but I think the number of tools, platforms, information out there, now we have AI and social media on top of it. I think for someone who wants to learn, it's quite hard to know where to go.
It is difficult. It is very difficult to know where to go. But at the same time, we're a bit older than the younger generation. And for them, that's all they know.
Yeah.
So we might
Social
have said,
first.
yes, we might have said, our parents might have said the same thing about us, that it's always all overwhelming, and but it's reality, and we got to communicate with the younger generation in the way that they can learn, not in the way that we think they can learn.
Amazing. I have 3 quick fire questions for you. What is one money belief we should change?
That women aren't good at investing.
What financial behavior matters more than we think?
To do it. To just invest. The real risk is not investing at all.
And what do people misunderstand about investing over time?
People misunderstand that it's too complex. It's really simple. We created, I used to say when I worked in banking, I used to say we created this language and this jargon just to keep our jobs.
Yes.
So actually it's quite simple, but I don't know why we made it so complicated. And we need to challenge the language, the jargon. Don't be scared of the jargon. It's not that difficult.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on The Wallet. You can subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We also share short clips on social media at Vestpod, and you will find the key takeaways and resources from this episode at vestpod.com. If you would like to go deeper, subscribe to the Vestpod newsletter via the link in the show notes for practical money insights, episode summaries, and updates on upcoming events.